Welcome to the start of Series 63, everyone. This series, we are sitting down with Aram Vartian and Alex V to learn about TTRPG, a game by Kieron Gillen and Stephanie Hans. We are thoroughly excited to present this series to all of you as it is turning out to be a memorable one. But before we get you started with today's episode, here's what to expect in our call to action.
The usual call to action. After the show, you can join us back here for our thoughts on the episode, information about our Patreon. We do have notes about our social media presences, and the usual stuff.
Yeah, I guess the most unusual thing is new social medias. Everybody, take a listen, follow us, enjoy. Until then, though, enjoy the show, everybody. Welcome to Character Creation Cast, a show where we discuss and create characters, the best part of role-playing games, with guests using their favorite systems. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan, and this episode, my co-host Amelia and I are excited to welcome back Aram Vartian, and welcome for the first time Alex from Replay, a TTRPG actual play podcast, to talk about TTRPG, a tabletop role-playing game based on the Die comic by Kieron Gillen and Stephanie Hans, produced by Rowan Rook and Deckard.
Welcome to Character Creation Cast. I'm really excited about this. So I'm really glad that you're both here with us today. I'm excited about this.
This is a good system. Yeah. It's a really good one to be excited about. It's the one that I've been most excited about in years.
And I'm just here for the ride, I guess.
Alex, you do know a lot about the game, Alex.
Yeah, well, we made the mistake of showing it to me, and then I was like, now you are stuck playing this with me for years.
The mistake was even bigger. The mistake was, I'm going to run this game that is optimized for at least 3 players, and I'm going to run it as a 1v1 game. And then it just kept going from there.
Yep, there you go.
That's how it starts. You're like, well, this would be a fun idea, and then
I didn't know.
It snowballs.
It's the same way I got into D&D. I had a babysitter who wanted to occupy me and did a one-on-one thing with D&D. The next day when they came back, I was like, I have a party ready and you have to walk me through party dynamics, which is exactly the same as we did with this game.
Yep.
That is the most neurodivergent story I've ever heard. It's like the next day they came back and I was like, I have read all 800 books and I made 12 characters and let's go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Aram and Alex, do you want to go ahead and tell us who you are, along with your pronouns, what sorts of things you are doing, where people can find you online, all of your intro. Please read us your resume.
My name is Aram. I am the co-producer of Kill Every Monster and the creator of God's Fall. And most recently, I launched a podcast network called Dead Ghost Productions. Replay is going to be the first Dead Ghost Presents show out of that studio.
Ooh.
That's exciting. I'm excited to see all of the projects that you're going to do under this fancy banner.
It's going to be a bunch of short 6 to 8 episode arcs where we can tell one good, solid story from beginning to end, give everyone a really satisfying conclusion, and then move on to the next system and the next story and the next group of players. And if any one particular arc really sparks joy with people, we can always bring them back for round 2.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I love that. I love that commitment to shorter arcs, because there's nothing worse than a podcast you get so invested in it and it goes on for a long time and then it just kind of peters out because life happens and people are people and the world is the world, and then you don't get a conclusion, And it's just so sad.
There's
so
a
like
single line in the Community TV show, which is, the British, they understand media, they understand closure.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's something to be said
Doctor
for like
Who, so they don't.
Well, right.
No, they understand a closure. They make 12 episodes over 7 years.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Or they do the same show since like 1960, whatever.
Right.
We'll just keep going and we'll just, write it in that we have to replace the actors and, yeah.
It was smart.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Hi, I'm Alex. Yeah. Pronouns he, him. I usually go by, I'm a bisexual, bilingual Britalian. Because all those things are true. I'm mostly a translator. I tend to work in book and literary translation, but I've been getting more and more clients who work in TTRPG. So I translate from Italian into English and sometimes English into Italian. And I used to say that people should not find me online because it is horrible to be perceived. But it turns out that self-promotion is important when you work freelance. So yeah, usually people can find me as Alex V or various variations of that. Yeah.
And as we were talking before we started the show, like we were talking about, some of the projects that you've worked on too. And like, you've got a lot of really good stuff under
I didn't realize how big they were until like 3 years later when it says any award winning. What?
Oh, we won? We did that? Yeah. They were really good. They were really good.
Thank you.
That's actually fun to be able to ditch the whole voting process and just find out that you won. That's a much more pleasurable
That sounds
experience.
like way less stressful than like, did we get nominated? Yeah. Did we,
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into this, and we'll start by discussing what this game is all about.
What's in a game?
Okay. What is the core concept of Die RPG?
Okay. Die RPG is a fantasy horror game that has usually been billed as Goth Jumanji in the way that you create real world people who are deeply flawed, have had life happen to them. They used to play together at some point in the past. They haven't played or even haven't seen each other for a while, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and get together again to play a game, the game of Die. The game of Die is fun and also predatory and sinister. The fantasy horror element of the game is also the fantasy horror element of the game within the game.
Ooh, I'm okay. All right.
I can see there's
I'm here for it. I'm here for it.
We're getting some hooks in here.
Much like the Barbie movie, right? This game is for people who love Dungeons and Dragons and hate Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay. You're like, that's a cool concept. I hate everything about it.
Yeah.
Like, if it was what I wanted it to be, it would be great. Got it.
And this game literally makes everything that you wanted it to be real. That goes both for your characters and for the players, usually. It does try to minimize bleed as much as it can, but it almost unavoidably, every time someone has played it, like especially like the first times, you tend to stumble into creating a character that is very close to yourself or has some major elements that connect to yourself.
Which I love.
Stumble's a word. I leapt off a cliff, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that is certainly a thing. We can talk about it later, or we can talk about it now, I guess. But like the amount of bleed that a person wants in a game too can be highly variable. There are some people that are like, this is my escapism. I'm going to be over here. I'm turning my brain off. That's great. And if games do that for you, that's awesome. Then there are people on the other end that are like, no, I want to use this to explore things in a safe space that I can't do it. Like I want to bring the things that I have within me to the table. And so I think knowing what you're getting into, going into a game is always good. Like knowing that this is going to be one with a lot of bleed is good. There's a lot of benefit there though.
And it's something that the system has built in itself is it's very immediate and intrinsic. I'm going to say like almost like innate recognition of the safety tools that are required to play a game like this. Like there are discussions as part of character creation that have to do with how much bleed do we want? What's the tone that we're aiming for? And everything has the disclaimer. We can obviously change our mind as we play the game, but as we set off to play the game, what are the major railroads we do or don't want to encounter?
That's awesome. I like that's baked in there, that it's something that clearly the designers took seriously, that people were like, okay, this is going to happen. And then they've given you the tools rather than having to go out and find them yourself. Because I think sometimes when people have to do that, they don't. And so that that can always be problematic too.
Or they don't know how to completely make it interface. It doesn't quite line up right. Maybe they're not used to it, so they don't know how to make it work with the game. Right. And this one bakes it in. In fact, one of the primary characters, one of the quote unquote classes, as far as like if you were understanding D&D, right? One of the paragons is so loaded that the whole thing is like, are we even going to have it available? Let's start there. That's the first question. If we do have them available, what are the precautions? What can they do? What can they do to others? And there's just check boxes the whole way down to make sure everyone's on the same page.
I really like that.
Nice.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about the setting of this game?
No.
All right.
Because we have to play.
Great answer.
Here's the thing. So, yes, in general, you can. There is a comic book that came first. And then the role-playing game was, obviously they were thinking of both at the same time, but the comic book comes out first. The role-playing game comes out after it. There is an overarching story. There is what would you call it? Because
I feel like the story told in the comic is the setup for the way in which the game exists afterwards. But the way in which the comic is also written has a bit of like recursive elements to it. So like the game only exists because the people play the game, but for the people to play the game has to exist. And in the same way, players in the real world playing the game can only play the game that exists because the characters in the comic played the game in the first place.
So this is like Jumanji versus Jumanji 2?
Kind of, yes.
It's if the existence of Jumanji made Jumanji work and birthed a god of Jumanji, then yes, that's what this is.
Amazing.
There is a point specifically in the manual where Kieron Gillen explicitly references Rocco's Basilisk, which was a thought experiment from people who work in coding and computing and in artificial intelligence. And like the idea is I'm going to kill a lot of people by just saying this because that's I'm not just Google it at your own peril. But also there is a second part of the answer, like the setting itself, which is both in the comic and kind of exists in the game. If you were to play a longer campaign, which is not like the preferred method of die, but the longer campaign, it is a world that is in the shape of a 20-sided polyhedron. And each of those 20 triangles is a different world in itself. So each region is its own biome. It's not a biome because it's not round. I'm sorry, Aram.
Thank you.
But each triangle is its own region. Each region has its own master. Each master has or doesn't have alliances with other regions in the game, on the die.
Okay. Is there weird gravity between each triangle?
Each world is its own world. There's like you could choose. Like the concept in the campaign is that each of the regions is an expression and manifestation of each of the players' things. So each region has its own manifestation of something that you pick from the players to create that region, in the way that the first region you explore is mostly a manifestation of what the master's like obsession is, which is usually, the failed fantasy game you played in high school.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
It's just that's not exactly the setting that you play in the core version of the game.
Right.
So it sounds like there's still like a lot of leeway, obviously. Like there's like this general concept of like how things work, but like what it is, like aesthetically, culturally, like all of that is up to you.
Yeah.
And frankly, you could not touch on any of it. You could just ignore all of that altogether. The only real core thing that has to be there, I think, is obviously the paragons and the general operation of play, but the dice. Like the dice have to be there. There's no avoiding that. That's at the absolute core of this game.
Interesting.
Oh, it was really cool.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Speaking of dice, what sort of materials do we need to play this game?
Everything you need to play D&D, you need to play this, just in different numbers. So the core mechanic here is D6s. You have abilities which are just the same as Dungeons and Dragons. You have strength, dexterity, con, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. You have 2 points in each of these things, and you get 2 points to add at the beginning. So it's just 1 through 4, and that gives you your basic dice pool. So you have 1 through 4 D6s whenever you're asked to roll something. You get an extra one if you have advantage or someone is helping you, and then you have a specialty die, one of the polyhedral dice. Each paragon gets 1. That paragon is the only person who will ever use that die in the game. It is special and unique for them and them alone. And
interesting.
That's how it pulls at D&D tropes while completely subverting them at the same time, even with just the very dice themselves.
Wow.
I like that.
There's even a little ritual where you hand them out at the beginning.
We'll get to that.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's really
it's a very
cool.
theatrical game. It's a game that relies, like, just the whole conversation around safety tools uses like the magic circle definition. The entire, like, the core game is called rituals. There is an opening and ending ritual that you use, like the actual verbiage and phrasing that you use for the game. And just, it follows. And even in the game, there is a ritual you have to complete in order to determine when the game ends or doesn't end.
If I was playing this at a table, I would be like, I really want a smoke machine. Like, it's that level of dramatic.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm okay. the transcripts for this episode are going to be a lot of like,
Well, this is why I was really interested, because I've been on your guys' show before. And my first thought was, this is such a perfect match for this type of show, because most of it, if not everything about this game, is found in character creation. Like, the largest chunk of the world building, the character building, the relationship building, how we're even going to play the game is totally tied into how we build our characters at the beginning.
Oh, that makes that even more exciting, because we've definitely covered games where it's like character creation is totally like doesn't have anything to do with the game, really. And it doesn't really teach you about playing the game or the mechanics of the game. We're like, cool, we made characters. You people know nothing about the game still.
It's so like it borrows elements from a lot of different game design. It definitely borrows elements of Powered by the Apocalypse in terms of how you build those relationships. I'm thinking like Monster Hearts specifically. But also I was listening to your episode on Sleepaway. And it definitely has that element of you are building the world together, you are building the characters together, but it's even more freeform than that, because in Sleepaway you're answering specific questions that are preset for each character that you choose. In this one, you are answering the questions in order to determine who the character even could be.
Oh, very cool.
Nice.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about Bleed. We've talked about sort of like the general kind of like meta concept of what's happening here. But what kinds of stories and themes do you think that this game is suited to?
It's an interesting question, because there's 2 types of, for me, for a 47-year-old man, right, who has been playing this game for a very, very long time, who has run into some physical ailments and struggled with a few things. For me, it's about 2 things. It is about diving into why we play games, but it's also diving into lost time, lost opportunities, maybe things that have been forgotten or put down or were too hard or paths not taken. And all of that really ties into who I am as a person. So that hits really hard. It's kind of fun playing it with like 20-year-olds who are like, well, this is what I'm going to be like when I'm 38. And they have this real firm idea of what they think it's going to be. And for me, it's like, I remember 38. I remember where I was. So it's interesting. It really feeds into a lot of things that both excite me and give me anxiety. And it makes for a nice basis for the game.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm like, oh, like that whole like, what if my ex-husband hadn't lied to me and I actually did go to grad school and didn't end up divorced with 2 children and didn't,
Totally.
Yeah.
What if your ex-husband now manifests as a giant creature that you recognize as something that you could potentially either talk out of existence or take out of existence in this game to fulfill the subconscious desire of finally being done with it? And then you realize that, oh, did I murder someone?
No, I don't know. I think that's a space that interests me, but like is not one that I think a lot of games support.
Totally.
You can certainly play versions of yourself or like, that like with your 20-year-old example of like, this is my idealized version of like what it's going to be like. And, or what I thought life would be like. But I don't think a lot of games like that's specifically what you're going
I think there's
for.
There's a specific
point. It also makes
point.
me so anxious.
Oh, there's a specific point in the manual that kind of addresses that as well. Just like before the game and going into like the safety tool conversation, which is what kind of person do you want to play is one of the major questions before you even start beginning to think about sitting down at the table. Because it's like, do you want to play someone that will bleed into your own lived experiences? Do you want to play someone who is the complete opposite from you just so you get to play that special class? It's like, you have no interest in tech. You don't know anything about coding, programming, but you really want to play a cyberpunk character in a fantasy setting.
Yeah.
Who do you create to play that character?
That's really cool. So speaking of that, then when we make our characters, what do characters tend to do in this game?
What can't they do?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because technically anything. These characters start as superheroes, right? You start with just being given power, having it instantly and having to jump into this world and then all of a sudden be able to do amazing things. And then the sky's the limit because there's so many ways to crank everything up. There's so many ways to level and advance, but also there's so many ways from the very first moment to negotiate and find ways to power. There are avenues set before you could burn the world game one if you really played it right and didn't hold back. It's possible. So there is this intense balance from the very beginning where it feels like a knife's edge and it doesn't really let up, whether it's twisting it physically or emotionally or just with the absolute dread or joy of the setting. Like you never really feel completely settled in this place. And if you do start to, then you have to worry about why.
Oh, that's true. That's so interesting. I guess it makes sense why the classes are called paragons, right?
Yeah. That's the other big part of it, because you are playing a real life person who also has issues and damages of their own, who is then playing a character in this world. So
yeah. But they're like embodying the character a la Jumanji.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right? So you're not creating a character who creates a character. You create a character who is suddenly given the abilities of a fantasy archetype.
Right. Yeah. So you are like Super Knight, but your name's still Jeff. You're Jeff the Super Knight. You're not, Sir Arnold, the greatest. You're just Jeff, the Emotion Knight.
Oh, that's so cool.
It helps me a lot too, because if I have to remember 3 names, there's no way I'm getting anyone right.
Playing it in a convention setting, it makes it really helpful. Like you can play it, like if you're playing online as well, just changing the name on the screen, changing the name, putting like the little name tags as we used to do in school. Yeah, just a little triangle of paper with your name and your paragon
your name
class.
tent. Mm-hmm.
So you never refer to the player. Like there are, again, specific moments in the manual where it says that you have to ask some hard questions because persona generation never ends. You keep creating the game and the world as you play it, but make sure that you are not asking the player what is their worst memory of something about this. It's, hey, player, what is your character's worst memory about this? Just to make sure that line is always safe, that bleed is only intentional, it's never accidental, and it's never harming the players at the table.
And of course, that you're using standard X and O cards and other tools so that anyone can bail out whenever they need to in case they tiptoe over a line.
Yeah. Because I can see, like, especially as you get into games and, you know, like, you can put trigger warnings on things and people can certainly say, you know, like, these are my things that you don't talk, but then you're never able to list all of the things, right? You're never going to list, like, everything that I'm afraid of and would like you to not talk about. And, you know.
Sometimes you find things out. Sometimes you say something off the cuff and then you start diving into it and you're like, oh, man, I am way over my head here.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So our question here, what is unique about this game? Where do we start? I know that
Please you start, because I don't know where to start.
I think the dice most. I mean, not the dice themselves, not the physical dice, but how the dice are used. I think is a fairly unique thing about this game. Would you agree with that? You have more experience with games than I do in general.
Who's the you that you are asking?
Sorry, Alex. Would you agree with that?
Alex I haven't read it yet. I don't know.
Yeah, Alex mostly agrees. I think what is unique about it is that it recognizes the value of the tangible physicality of an object that is part of a make-believe game. Because most games, like, the dice are not a part of the game. If you play any role-play game, the dice are just the mechanic, the engine that make the game run.
Yeah.
This game specifically says you need physical dice, and they are physically existing in the game, and those are not necessarily the dice that you use to let the game run. You have to have them. There's even if you play online, it recommends, and it's probably something that we'll try, which will not work as an audio performance, but it'll work as a visual performance, and we'll have to describe what's happening. But is make sure you have the physical dice, because that part of the ritual, like that material component, is crucial.
That's interesting.
So I think it's
not kind of like a transportation point between our reality and the reality of the game's reality.
Literally what it is. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And that's, that's
so
something
cool.
that was in the comic. It's something that's there's a mini comic at the beginning of the game manual.
Brilliant. Let's just pause for a moment. The comic work is so good. It's so good in both the actual comic and then the additional panels you get in the book. Stephanie's work is just lush and gorgeous and horrifying and unsettling and enticing. She is unbelievably good.
Mm-hmm. Amazing.
It's the art you all wish you had. All of us. Whenever we do something, it's like, oh man, if we just had an artist like Stephanie, yeah.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask actually too about the emotion wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is a
it's
thing
a disproven
that
psychological theory. We do not use it in actual psychology or therapy or anything that has any actual value and repercussion in the real world. Disclaimer.
Correct. But as a fun pinwheel.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it looks like a lot of things in my dialectical behavioral therapy workbooks. But, obviously this is not therapy. As we've discussed on a previous episode recently about RPGs as therapy tools and how your table is not a therapeutic setting.
It is not.
Your friends are not therapists.
They are not.
Yes. But it is something that feels very unique to this game. And like, I have not seen, there are some games certainly where you're like, okay, this is my reaction. Like, I'm mad now, and that means I get plus whatever to whatever, but this seems very, very different from that, from what I can tell.
So there are two paragons specifically that use the emotion wheel. They don't necessarily use them in the same way. Like they both rely on emotions for their special power to manifest. The emotion knight chooses an emotion that essentially, I am mad, therefore more power. Or I am sad, therefore more power. I am grieving, therefore more power. I am vigilant, therefore more power. And that power manifests and is, it's a conduit. The emotion knight has an arcane weapon that either pursues that emotion or negs on the paragon to the point of chasing that emotion, or is just completely against it. One of the suggestions about the emotion knight is to have a weapon that is adorably the opposite of what you expect it to be, because the weapon speaks. So you can have a sword who does not want to play violence. You can have an axe that only wants to be buried and does not want to be chucked around. I think in the game that Aram and I played, we had a chain that spoke.
Whip.
It was a chain whip that spoke with the voice of the hot boy that no one ever kissed.
Oh.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could see the like amount of like, so as somebody who like very much identifies myself as an empath, like I have big feelings. This is what I say, like, and I say that to my son too, because he also has big feelings. I can't tell if that would be like a good or a bad choice. Like, it's like go all in.
Again,
like
it's not the player's
feelings.
It's
Right.
the feelings of the persona as Paragon in that moment. And it's something that the GM has to remember. So there's a lot of tips and tricks for the GM in the game, including in the GM screen, including in the manual itself. There's a whole chapter on how to run the game from the GM side of things, which is just remind the emotion knight, remind to ask them and remind to lure them towards their emotion. Like, what are they feeling right now? How is this particular situation making them feel? And because the intensity of their emotion determines the intensity of their powers.
Yeah.
And you can also, so you're playing with the characters, you're playing with them. Like, you want the people at the table to understand, to all be on the same page and to have good experiences. Your characters, there's no good choices for your Paragons. The Paragons have a series of choices to make that will either hurt them or hurt them less. That is the general options they have. There are, of course, moments of real and true joy and silliness built into that. But the good choices are for the people actually playing the game. The Paragons don't have that many options.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is why this is absolutely 100% my kind of game.
Yeah.
I can see Ryan over here being like,
and then
I mean, I'm not saying that you don't find it interesting, but like, I know that you don't necessarily like deep dive, look for that, like, sort of like,
I am
hurt me
in that mindset. No, I'm 100% in that mindset. Lately, I've experienced a taste of it at one point in one of my games, and I'm like, give me more, because this I haven't experienced this in games before, and it's rare to have a game that's designed around that sort of experience, and I really want to dive headfirst into that sort of world.
I felt that way like the first time I had a game that had like that sort of like emotional impact that wasn't just hit the thing with the sword, do the, you know.
Yeah.
That was like, we have like a narrative story and there's emotional impact to the decisions that I'm making, in that same like there is no right decision kind of situation.
Yeah.
And it's like, I have been sort of chasing that experience since then. And I've gotten it a few times, but it's definitely difficult, because I think especially when people have listened to a lot of like actual plays and things like that, they tend to skew toward comedy. And so people tend to, I've had a really hard time like finding serious groups that will like play like an emotionally devastating game. Because it leans silly always.
It's interesting you mention that, because one of the shows I listened to in order to like really get a grasp on what this show is called My First Dungeon, and they did such a nice balance of like really making this world feel dangerous and giving it weight and giving it emotional consequence, and still being able to add so many truly hilarious moments into it. In fact, the game itself encourages it. So yes, it's dark. Yes, it's dreary, and yes, it's going to pull on some emotional heartstrings, both good and bad. But the Fool literally has a mechanic built into the character where if they crack up the whole table and the whole table laughs, they get a little bonus just for making the actual table laugh. So it does really say, okay, yes, be dark, be real edgelord, right? But also don't forget, you're all having fun at the table. Right, this is a game.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, if that's the experience that you want, like, awesome.
Absolutely.
It's not for everybody.
Yeah, I think because the opposite of that is this. So this is playing with emotions and like chasing emotions in order to achieve power or achieve intention. The other character that uses the emotion wheel is the dictator, which uses emotions to manipulate other people. It's pitched as a bard if bards were terrifying and everyone was afraid of them. It's speaking to the theater kids, it's speaking to the performers, it's speaking to people who want to elicit emotion, and then it twists that. And it's like, oh, you elicit emotion, and that means you make people do stuff. And it's terrifying. And the dictator is one of the roles that in the safety tools, in the safety conversation to have at the beginning of the game is, do we even want this character in the game? Because you don't want to remove agency from people. If the character is in the game, are they allowed to use their powers on other players?
Yeah.
And if they are allowed to use their powers on other players, how much? Can they take full control or can they just manipulate them? So there's little safety levers and little kind of boxes to, you're like, okay, this is the one we want to check off. And now we've got a dictator we can use, or nope, we're just going to shove that and shelf it. And we're just going to play with the other 4.
Yeah. I do like that. I'm getting the sense that this game has a lot of like buttons and dials for those kinds of things rather than just being like, yep, it's silly. Yep, it's sad. Like, you know, that there's a lot of levels and that it seems really good about continually checking in to make sure that like we're still okay with those levels or that it hasn't creeped up too far or
One of the very first things you do is like, how much of a horror setting is this going to be? How much of a fantasy setting is this going to be? And then how do we want it to end? Which is one of the nicest things. Like, do we want it to end with like a huge tragedy and it's a very cathartic dump? Do we want a standard fantasy happy ending where it was the friends we made along the way? Or do we want it a little complicated where there are some lingering doubts and some feelings left over? But for the most part, we had a very satisfying journey. Like, where do you want to hit? And my first instinct, because I'm again from D&D was like, oh, is that giving away too much? But no, it's not. It's finding a place we can all tell stories together to get us on the same page. It doesn't steal anything at all. It just gives everyone a little bit more agency.
Yeah, and you're all playing toward the same goal then too. So it is a better experience for everyone as players, knowing that like, okay, we're all going to walk away with what we said we wanted.
If you're going to have a shared story, you have to share the story. You can't just give your players a couple background options and say you shared the story. That's not how it works.
Yes. Right. And this is further, once again, my hill to die on, that metagaming is not bad. It is not a dirty word.
Correct.
One of the characters, one of the paragons is, well, maybe 2 of them, but definitely one, is literally you cheat reality. You change the rules of the game, you change the rules of physics, you change the rules of narrative overall. The paragon is the master. And this is probably the answer I should have given at the beginning of the question, which is, what is unique about this game? The GM has a character. The GM gets to play, if you play a standard game, they play the character called the master. The master is also a playable character. If you play, especially a longer game, you can give it to a different player. It doesn't have to be the GM's player. Because they manipulate the laws of reality, and their special power is they have cheat tokens. They can spend cheat tokens to cheat.
Yep.
Interesting.
It's an ability literally called hardcore cheating, because they can always manipulate a little bit, but this one they're just like, nope, I'm flipping over the table and spending a token, and I am going to cheat a lot.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It feels like this is kind of that asynchronous character mechanics that we talked about with Spencer.
That's like my favorite. I have so many favorite things in games, but it's one of my recent favorites in games is like asynchronous character creation, character types, where the mechanics that you're using as a character are just not necessarily just the same, you know. So again, not in D&D where like no matter what I'm playing, it's roll plus stat. It's the way I am interacting with the mechanics is meant to reinforce the feeling of what I am doing at the table, which is already my favorite thing in games in general. When mechanics like make you feel things, and when you get to do it by character type too. They're like, I pick this character, I interact with the rules in this way. And if I picked a different character type, my interaction with that world would be different. It makes my heart so happy. And not very many games do it, but like...
You will love this game. That will feed you everything you want there. Absolutely.
Oh, so good.
But a warning,
Well,
whatever die feeds you, it takes back, twists, and then gives back to you. So you'll get what you want, but it might not be what you want in the end.
Well, that's just what you want, though,
Yeah,
right, Amelia?
Absolutely.
It's exactly what I wanted. I don't see the problem. Like you're just saying the same thing over and over again. Yeah.
All right. Before we get to actual character creation and everything, we do have to talk about the history of the game. This is my Wikipedia article diving session, but this game, the Die comic, first came out in June of 2019, and as you said, Aram, they created the comic with the intention of creating the RPG. They were actually developing it simultaneously.
Yeah.
I think this game's been in development for like 7 years or something like that.
You can feel it. It is there's plenty of bleed between the comic and the game. It's seamless.
Yeah.
They just fit together. Like it works so well. You don't feel like one was rushed or tacked on to the other. These are wholly of each other, and they just feel right.
And the beta of the game actually came out with the end of the first volume. So after 5 months of the comic coming out, the beta version of the game came out.
Oh, cool.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. And they released 4 volumes of the comics.
Because it's 20 issues. Like a 20-sided
20
die.
issues.
Yep.
Oh.
It was there all along.
Yeah, the 20-sided die, the 20 years, the fact that it starts in the year 2000, wraps up in 2020. It's all centered around that.
Yeah. And then in November of 2022, the whole compilation of the comics was released as a single giant graphic novel, which is really cool. And then in June of 2022, they successfully funded the RPG, and like the rest is history. Now it's getting out. It's going to start releasing, and this thing just looks amazing.
At the time of recording, they have fulfilled, I think, every single of the Kickstarter pledges. And I think, it should be open for general retail and stuff within probably around the time of Gen Con rolling around.
Okay.
And you can get the comics on Amazon right now. They're just just available.
Or from your local game comic bookshop.
You're right. You can get your comics from your local game comics shop. They are available everywhere. You don't have to wait or sign up for them. You can just go get them. I would highly suggest them. If you like The Wicked and the Divine, if you like Clean Room, if you like those comics, boy, are you going to love this one.
Yeah, they look fantastic. And Stephanie's art is just like next level. It's
so evocative, so colorful. Right. The way that they play with blood and soul and light and magic and energy, the way that they color these things is so interesting. I really, really dig her work.
Mm-hmm.
All right, last bit before we do this. Are there terms or concepts or things that are going to come up when we do this that we need to know?
There are going to be 2 terms that are going to be crucial. One we've used already, which is Paragon. But before we get to Paragons, we get to the personas. The personas are the real world characters the real world people that will create. And the Paragons are the fantasy classes that they will then be conferred the powers of. Okay. There are 6 Paragons, 1 for each polyhedral die, starting with the Dictator with a D4, the Fool with a D6, the Emotion Knight with a D8, the Neo with the D10, the Godbinder with a D12, and the Master with a D20. But all we need to remember is Persona and Paragon.
Awesome. Well, it's come to that time. Are we ready to make some people?
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, let's do it.
Let's make some people.
Let's make some people.
Let's make some people.
Where do you want to start?
Okay.
How do we get started in a session 0 for Die RPG?
I think you should do this one. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So before the game, we've been talking about like setting up safety tools and starting what the game calls the magic circle. And that is the totality of boundaries and lines and veils and safety tools and various tweaks and buttons and dials, as Amelia mentioned. for the game itself to proceed. And we can do the very fast version, which is just you give me a multiple choice answers or to multiple choice questions, and then we'll just go from there. And it begins with, what is the tone of the game? Is it a standard fantasy? Is it a dark fantasy? Or is it a dark horror?
Ooh.
The default is usually dark fantasy.
That's what I would like, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You
Agreed.
have
Dark
agreement, right, Will?
fantasy sounds very good.
Which leads us to inter-party conflict. How are we going to treat direct conflict between player characters?
Would like that dial all the way up.
Yep.
The three choices, like the default is the second one, is no direct conflict between player characters. The default being during the climax, direct conflict between player characters might emerge, but is otherwise not a featured part of the story.
Okay.
Or direct conflict is possible throughout the game if the narrative demands it.
I like direct conflict.
Personally, I'm the same way.
There's a running joke in the Discord, which is not officially called the Discord, but it should be called the Discord,
Right.
which is this game is basically mess me up, boss, but everyone's the boss and everyone's already messed up.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the third option is the best one. The dictator role, and this is something we mentioned earlier. Like, do we want to, in our game that won't necessarily happen for this particular show, but in the game that we are hypothetically and imaginatively playing, do we want the dictator role? Yes or no? A reminder, the dictator is a character who literally manipulates other people by pulling at their emotional strings.
There
is a sub-question to this one. So it's like, in principle, do you agree to have the dictator or not? And then we have a follow-up to that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I feel like in principle, certainly for like this podcast, because we aren't playing it, I would like, the chance to sort of talk about some of those things. Yeah, that's where I'm at, is like, there are no consequences to my decisions here today. So,
right. I think it's fine to include for the exercise we're going to be doing today.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'd be fine always.
I
know
you
this
do.
character.
I very
much.
Yes,
I am very much about that. But yeah,
I also have that weird, like, well, if the dictator's not there, then the D4 is not in play. Then
True.
what are we doing?
Where's the complete set?
Unless
got to catch them all.
There is no player or there's no character who is using the D4, but maybe the D4 exists in the world, and that becomes part of your plot.
Oh.
Maybe there's people who want to be the dictator.
But the follow-up question to the dictator role is, can the dictator use the voice, their special power, on other player characters to control them? And we have the option of yes, no, only on NPCs, and maybe, but needs to get consent each time they use it on another player character.
Yeah, I feel like that last one.
I would throw it in the maybe column.
Yeah.
That tends to be like the standard for most games. It's just like, just check in that everyone's fine with it.
Feels like the best place to put it.
Yeah.
And just like as a reminder, like the GM has a character. So the GM also needs to give consent for the dictator to manipulate the master character.
Mm-hmm.
And this would also be a good time to have a discussion with people about like, okay, is everybody at the table capable of saying no?
Yeah.
Because there are certainly some people that are like, well, I don't want to mess up anybody's fun and I don't want to, so it's like, okay, understand that like, if we agree that we're going to check in, you also need to agree that you're going to say no if it's not okay. That comment specifically directed at my sister, who does not want to upset anyone ever.
You always want to check in with this game frequently. And also, it's a game where it can be okay. Like, let's say that everyone's like, we want the dictator to be able to work and do this, and they can mess with my character, sure. And one person's like, you know what? I personally don't feel comfortable, but I'm fine with like watching you all do and like being here while we do it. I just don't want to personally have this interaction. No problem. For some reason, the voice doesn't work on your character. That's it. And you can tie it into this game easily. And you don't even have to bring it up. We just all understand the voice doesn't work with you. And that's it. And you can even play with it as a story point. Like, I know I can't be affected, so we use it later, and it still is cool because there's nothing about this game where you can really shatter the rules. You can certainly bend them, but if you're doing it for story and for the comfort of people at the table, the game encourages that.
Yeah. That's a really cool option too. I like that it, again, is not all or nothing. I didn't even think about that as like a possibility of just saying
This game is gray
not
areas.
for me. Thank you.
There is no black. Well, no, I'm sorry. The game is gay areas. Sorry, gay areas. Well, the game is
it's got
gay
plenty
areas,
of those
no
too,
doubt.
depending on who's playing.
Really, I think
mine would have plenty.
Even it doesn't depend on who's playing. The game,
it's going to make it. Yeah.
It
leans to like the moral arc of this universe leans towards gay. But in addition to that, there are no gray areas. Like this game is about gray areas, not black and white, except when it is specifically about black and white.
Which actually is a good point into the last actual question before we go into the more open questions, which is knowing that we can check in and change our minds as our feelings evolve over the course of the game. What kind of ending are we aiming for right now? And Aram has mentioned this already. Is it a hard-won, happy ending, fantasy, high fantasy, the friends we found along the way? Is it an emotionally complicated but satisfying conclusion, which is usually the default mode? Or is it a cathartic tragedy? Everyone dies, but it was a good death. Well, not necessarily dies, but...
Everyone's shattered in some form.
Yeah.
Yeah. I vote that one.
So we're aiming.
Don't laugh at me.
Yeah. I was kind of leaning for the middle ground, but I could go for shattered. As long as it's explicitly not like guaranteed everybody dies, everybody.
I think this is more accepting the idea that you will be killing your friends.
Yeah.
That's the cathartic tragedy. It's like someone is going to be either horribly. People are going to come out very horribly out of this experience, either not at all or just changed for life for the worse. Whereas the middle ground is more of there is the possibility of some death, some harm to occur. That's not the point of the story. The story is trying to find some form of redemption, or at least addressing the persona's lacks and the persona's issues in a way that is complicated, but still resolves some of those issues.
Yeah. Let's get dark.
As a player, I want to get dark. As a GM, boy, do I hesitate on that last question. Like, I really want to run it as a player. I'm not sure how gung-ho I'd be as a DM unless I had a crew that I knew well.
You seem a very fan of the players, like, type of GM.
I really am. So, like, I will happily help you torture yourself as a fellow player, but as a GM, I kind of want to be on your side.
Yeah. But if that's what they're asking for, you are on their side.
Right, exactly.
The reminder that keeps coming through, though, the GM is not only a player, the GM also has a character. The GM definitely has a say. It's not just in service of the players.
Yeah.
You have to agree to everything.
Yeah.
Just like they do. And if you do agree that the dictator's voice works on the players or doesn't work on the players, it's the exact same thing as you. So it can't work on you and not work on them. It's equal every way around. The only exception is if someone needs an out. Like, you don't add on, you just give exceptions to make sure everyone's safe. But if you want the voice to work on me, you got to leave yourselves open as well.
Yeah.
So moving out of the multiple choice section, we then go into a more, I suppose, standard practice for safety tools, which is essentially determining lines and veils for the game, which is phrased in the manual as, what are we leaving out of the game? And this is, when you go listed this on a website where you are, promoting pro GM tools, and you have to choose a list of possible content warnings, it's all of them.
It's all of them.
Because
anything can happen in this game.
And people need to create messed up people, and how those people get messed up is a myriad ways.
Yeah.
But that's where the conversation at the table is crucial, because there are certain elements that, like, I usually never have in my games elements that include sexual assault, anything that include violence, gender-based violence. Having said that, there was a game that I played with Aram where we had one character who was a lawyer who ended up defending horrible, horrible men. And that was played into the narrative. We just wanted to see how to play a character like that, but we would only do it because it was the two of us. And we knew what we were doing, and we knew that we could just stop at any moment.
Yeah.
And that is not something I would suggest to a group. That is just, I have played this, I know how to run it, and I know that it's not something that everyone, in fact, most people would like to run.
Right.
So what are we leaving out of this game?
Yeah, anything related to sexual assault.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any of the bigotries, any of the misogyny, any of the homophobia, ableism, definitely don't want to hurt kids. You know, the big ones. Don't want, and like excessive gore, like, you know, stab someone, cut off their head, whatever. But like, I don't want like, you know, and the river of blood and the entrails. Like, I don't need all that, right?
Like put that behind a veil at the very least.
Exactly.
See, that's a really good indication for the game because we were saying the emotion knight earlier. There is one spoke of the emotion wheel that you can choose the emotion knight of disgust. So it's a disgust knight, a loathing knight. And that is signaling that that player wants to be disgusted by stuff. Like they want to do disgusting stuff, and their most powerful emotion is feeling disgust. So if we say no gore, you have to find a different way of eliciting that disgust that isn't visual, vivid descriptions of gory consequences to stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It can also just mean you don't play a disgust night.
Right.
Right. Just make a
Easy way
slightly
out,
different choice.
Yeah.
And the next question is, what are we inviting into our game? So we talked about things that we want to exclude from the game. What do we want to explore as themes? But also I've had people answer with, I want meme references in my game. I want luscious descriptions of food. I want recognizable references to local things. So like if we're playing a game with people all from the same area, they would like to have like, like this region looks like the Rogers Arena in Vancouver City.
Hey, actually, to go back to that previous, like what things do we not want to include? Something that I've learned, particularly from when I played Aram Create, which is like one of my favorite world building games. It was nominated. I don't remember if it won or not, but anyway, it's a very good like world building collaborative game. But one of the sections that they have in there talks about it being not only things that you're like, this is a hard line, I won't do this, but what things are you just not interested in? So for me, a lot of times, like when we start doing world building and things like that, obviously not in this game, but in other games, the example I give is like, I don't really want like tiny forest creatures. I don't like, that's just like, that is not my genre. That is not my, like, I don't want to play as tiny animals.
Yeah.
So,
the cozy
always like
sentient animal trope.
Right. That's not for me. So I always like try to remind people too that like you can say things that aren't like just like trigger warning kind of things, but you can also list things that are just like
to explore in the game.
Like no, thank you.
Yeah.
Not interested in that.
I'm bored with this idea. I don't want to.
Yeah.
Heteronormative romance. No.
Right. The United States Supreme Court. Anything to do with health insurance.
Creatures. Sorry, I cut off a joke there. Say again, Amelia.
I said anything to do with health insurance.
Yeah. That's fair. Tiny forest creatures is interesting because there was a conversation that we were having in the Discord about this, about how like could a persona choose their paragon to be a non-human? And in the beta version of the game, there was an option to have like an anthropomorphic animal of some kind. That is no longer the case. There is nothing that says you can't be a cat person, but why? And I don't mean why in the why would you do something like this? I mean why in the why is your idealized version of yourself an anthropomorphic animal? And how does that relate to the rest of the world? And how does it relate to the group of people around you? And that is really, it's narratively very juicy.
Yeah. Like what are all of the implications for the rest of the world that you've built then too? You know, like, are you the only one? Is there an entire race of cat people? Where did you come from?
If you choose to be in Die, you are an anthropomorphic animal for the rest of eternity. There is no going back unless you end the game.
Yeah.
The big choice. It's not just an aesthetic, like.
Especially if it's a wish fulfillment thing that you cannot access anywhere else. I mean, the thing you are then giving up because it's the only place where that could ever actually be true for you. And now it never will be again. Or it will be forever.
So are there any things that we are inviting into our game?
Struggles against classism, fighting the patriarchy, fighting the big bads of society that could not normally be defeated with a sword and moxie is always things I like.
Anti-capitalism is
it's one of
a
our
big
big
brand
faves.
on this podcast. Yeah.
Okay.
Big fan.
And also punishing the unjust.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Please.
I've played this game too much because as soon as Aram says that, I say, okay,
You are
this
the
is going to
unjust,
come
though,
back
aren't
and bite
you?
him.
Yes.
Because how do
Absolutely.
you determine what is unjust?
Right. Who's unjust?
Who's going to determine
rules?
this? But we also said we're not going to be talking about the U.S.
Obviously,
Supreme Court.
us.
I
so
was
we
like,
can't have that.
I already
Right.
just crossed that one out. So
Absolutely.
now who's in charge?
I'm thinking more Judge Dredd than I am.
Why wouldn't the
Supreme
Paragons
Court.
be the ones that have that choice? Come on.
Yeah.
We've got the most powerful.
Court
So-
is in session.
Naturally.
And the next point before we go into the actual persona generation is accountability. How will we make sure that we stick to everything we just said? Are we going to be using the X and O cards? Are we going to be using a semaphore system? Are we going to be using the take a break, like anonymous messaging, private messaging to the GM? What are the tools that we are going to employ? Like the X card is the one that is like most used and suggested in the manual as well. And there is a discussion and a link to how to use it properly. But also it might not be something that works for your particular game. Most of my online games that I've run have been either semaphore, so having objects of 3 different colors just to determine that, oh, I'm having a particularly intense scene, but I'm enjoying it. So let's continue having this. Yes, I am crying, but it's a good crying. Or it's just sending a private message to the GM.
Yeah,
I do like the red, yellow, green
Mhm.
system because that adds a bit of variability to it. It says, hey, let's slow down if you're in that middle ground, but we don't necessarily have to stop.
Mhm.
And then the red acts a lot like the X, green acts a lot like the O, and we've it's pretty easy to implement.
Yeah.
I like it because our attention is focused here. And I'll see it here. I might miss the X or the O. And I definitely I don't miss the X's as much as I miss the O's. Like, wait, I have to check in. Okay, yes, I did. And I miss those all the time because I'm just too focused here. But if I can see green, if I can see red, I can immediately switch gears within the thing. No one has to be called out. No one has to say, stop, let's think about this. I don't have to worry if I'm showing a bunch of emotion that everyone else is going to stop. I can just be like, yep, we're good. We're going to keep going. Yeah. That helps me a lot. I think as far as online play, it's the best one. It's the most natural one.
Yeah.
And if you're playing through Zoom, you've got all these little reactions you can do as well.
Yep.
That pop in there, and that really helps a lot.
I would also say a thing that is fairly easy to do too is like during a session, there are times where you're like, okay, let's take a quick break, whatever. And then, kind of before you settle back in after that to do both like a check-in of like, okay, is this the tone that we're all like playing for? And then I'm a big fan of the start, stop, continue. Like, like here's one thing that I would like to see. Here's something that I was like, I'm not feeling, or, hey, I really like this thing. Can we continue doing that? To just kind of get back in that space, and then, B, communicate to the GM, this is working, this is not.
And that's both foreshadowing and kind of like hinting at something that the closing ritual for each session includes, which is like specifically highlighted is decompression questions, aftercare, and stars and wishes as part of the game. So after each session, at the end of the game, at the end of the session, you collect the dice after you've given them out at the beginning of the session, and we'll get to that. But making sure that the check-in is happening as part of the manual, I think, is a really smart move on a character creation system. Okay. So with this discussion in place, the magic circle is in place, the limits and boundaries of what we are able to do and willing to go, where we are willing to go, we go into persona generation proper. There is a little line to read out or paraphrase. And then there are a number of different, they call social groups, which are the questions that create the group of people that we used to be when we first started playing and who we are now in the present day as we start playing the game. We might be easier to go with the basic one, the core one in the game, which is the reunited concept. There is a couple more. One is the driven circle, which eschews the high school setting and goes for a more, you met at a formative moment in your life, and then that moment went, and now you are back 10, 20, 15 years later. The reunited is you play the game in high school, you lost touch, you come back. There's a couple of extra ones that you can find in the manual as well that have been very, they've been tweaked a little bit to fit either like the one-shot idea. Some of them have been tweaked to fit a different kind of social group, both in terms of players and in terms of a game that you're willing to play. But yeah, I think the easiest might be using the reunited concept, which is just the basic one. Just keep reading through the manual.
Okay.
So, we are a group of people who at one point in our life have played a normal fantasy role-playing game and have gathered together to play a new game. Again, we are going to answer questions both individually and as a group to work out who we are and exactly how we're all messed up. The concept is that we all used to play fantasy role-play games as teenagers in school. And now it's been years. We're all back in town. It's a school reunion. We decided to get together to play a game for old time's sake. All players are free to ask each other further questions inspired by the ones that I'll read out. Some of them have like distinctive, like this is for you, but anyone can chime in. One of the core concepts of the game is that players have final say over their own persona. The GM has final say over the world, but the players have final say over their persona. If you say you have cat ears in game, the GM cannot say, no, that's silly. It's like, no, you have made that choice. That is something that exists in the world. Aram.
Yes.
Why did the group get together? And I'll give you some options, and then you can tell me if you want something different. We were the only kids at school who would ever even dream to play an RPG. We were the arty kids from the drama society. We were the detention kids and the smokers from behind the bike sheds, or something else.
I like the drama kids. I like the idea of us like setting up little D&D tables between set building and line reads. And I like our over dramatic games. I think that's excellent.
I do like that.
I agree.
We'd build whole sets so that the sets were kind of around us when we played. Like we'd actually spend a couple hours doing it, get the lighting right. Yeah.
Yeah. Very extra.
I love that.
As another point, if at any point you come up with a name for your persona, just let us know. Name and pronouns, if they change between then and now, that's also something to note. But one of the tips that the manual suggested that your name tends to follow your personality in some way. So you are choosing a name for your character, or maybe the character's name speaks to you in some way. Ryan, what was the school like? Was it an average comprehensive being British for a state school? A not a very nice place, and I'm editing for language here. Underfunded school, here we go. An expensive private school, or something else?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Because I kind of like the thought of it being an expensive private school, because then we'd have access to like extreme extra drama stuff.
Totally.
Yeah. So my siblings
rotates.
went to a very nice high school. Like, very nice private Catholic high school. And their drama department was bananas. Like, like the costumes, the sets, the work that they put, like, I mean, it was a production every single time. So yeah, I kind of like that concept too.
Yeah.
Of
like we're just going for extra here.
Yeah,
it's also like really signaling the fact that it's a fantasy game, because it's a really highly funded arts department, which is great.
That's why it's a private school. They don't have those public schools.
Do we have a name for this private school?
Like our sister. They're always like our sister of mercy, or our sister of learning, or our sister of the mount, or something like that.
Yeah. Okay, as the former
I
Catholic
can
here.
physically hear the gears turning.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like Holy Mother of something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Our Lady of Deliverance.
I kind of like Holy Mother on the Mount, and like we'd be on like it's a mountainside, heavily forested kind of school, right? So
like
it's
a nice little
literally
retreat area school.
it's literally kind of on the hill above the town that it serves. So it's literally this kind of castle-like building up there.
Yeah.
When I went to Japan, we went and visited Asia Pacific University, which is on a mountain like overlooking the village below.
Perfect.
And it is like it has an amphitheater. It is gorgeous, and that sort of aesthetic for this school would be amazing.
Yeah.
Half
like
of the school is
always feeling above everybody else, kind of.
All the brochure shots are like overlooking the town. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what did we decide?
like
Holy Mother of the Mount?
Holy Mother of the Mount.
Of the Mount or on the Mount?
On the Mount. On the Mount probably makes more sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amelia, the GM's persona, in this case, I'm going to take the mantle, as Aram has pointed to me. My persona ran the game. What was the name of the fantasy world where the game was set? The Eternal Empire of Athan? The Fields of the Zephyr Children? The Shadowlands? Or something else?
My brain wants it to be the Gardens of Whitlock. And I don't know why, but my brain decided that's what the name is.
I have no notes.
None of it means anything, but...
We have extensive gardens as part of our school. In addition to the woods, there's like these sculpted gardens right up to the back of it. And there's plaques throughout it. Every bit of it has been donated. And there's this one big bench area in the center with ponds. And the Whitlock family donated that whole central courtyard. And that's what it got pulled off. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, there's one of those like
amazing.
we're like sitting around and you're trying to name it and you like look out the window and you're like,
yeah, you did the usual suspects.
Gardens of
thing.
Whitlock. That's great.
Yeah. Cup TV person. All right, got it.
I'll ask this to everyone. Actually, maybe I'll ask it to myself.
Ask it
as
to
I am a
yourself.
player, how many years has it been since we left school? Has it been 5, 10, 20, something else? As a reminder, like the concept is that it is a school reunion, so it makes sense to be a round number at this point.
Yeah.
I always like 20.
I was going to, I
number.
feel like that too,
Yeah, I was
especially
thinking
like
either 20, 25.
So we're going
gives
from
enough space.
ending school would be around 17, 18, depending on what state you're in or country. So we're looking at like entering late 30s, early 40s for the game.
All pushing 40.
It's a good time period that hits close to reality.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, I think my persona, my terrible little man, is called Francis.
Francis.
Which I think I have used before, but
Yeah. I think I'm going to go with Bentley.
Bentley.
Yeah.
Francis, of course, is short for Franciscus.
Excellent. Bentley doesn't go short of anything. My name is Bentley. That is what I am called.
do you put the emphasis on like you're like it's Bentley?
It is.
Are you like very
Bentley.
particular about that?
It's
No,
hard
like, it's not like Bentley.
Absolutely no. It is Bentley. Yeah.
I think Francis was the middle name. I think it's something like Augustus Franciscus. Whitlock the Third. He was of the Whitlocks. And so when the Gardens of Whitlock was suggested,
Of the
it was
mountain
like, yes.
Whitlocks?
Oh, amazing.
So these questions are for each of you and each of us. And the first one is, at the most basic level, how would people think of you at school? Were you academic, A student, a class joker, just plain creepy, a bully, a jock, a wallflower, an elitist snob, a tech nerd, a hard case, or something else?
My guy is he's not an elitist snob. He's just a bit of a jerk, but also a bit of a jerk that knows where he sits. His parents are very near money. Okay. He is the child of brand new money and brand new money that happened almost overnight. So there is this era of expectation with him where he likes to spend money, but doesn't have the background of like, this is a classical thing you would spend money on. Like this is a place where it'd be, understood as proper and important to sink money in. No, this is like obnoxious sinking of money just to show we have money. That's his whole idea. And he shows that off without restraint.
Was he generous in any way with it? Like, was it spending the money with friends, on friends, for friends?
Generous in that it gets spent and doesn't mean that much to him. And it's easier to just do it. And also he likes to be the guy in control. So yes, on all those counts, but never really with a thought of this will make someone's day easier.
It's like, when you drive the car that I bought you, you'll know it was me.
Right.
Exactly. Why are we talking about money? Just hand me the bill. That kind of thing.
Yeah. I think my character's name is going to be Christopher. And Christopher was the tech nerd of the high school. Always in the computers, always up on the latest technology, ran lighting for the show, obviously.
You're the one who knows how to do things so that everyone else gets to be on stage.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I set up the mics and the lighting and stuff. So like I've got the tech support for the sound systems and like even the acting teachers and all that sort of stuff. They don't know as much as I do about all that stuff.
Oh,
so
sure.
I feel like when it comes to technical issues, Christopher's like always just move out of the way. I can take care of this.
Awesome.
I'm not going to explain what I'm doing because I know what I'm doing.
Like he's on all the PHP boards. He's, IRC chat rooms. Like he admins a couple. He hosts a couple of them. Yep. This is 2003.
2003. Oh Lord.
Yep.
He's got his ICQ, his AIM, his MSN. He's got all his instant messengers all hooked up into one. Like, I think there was like an app that you could do that had all of them on your computer.
And I guess in retroactively going to Bentley on that, I guess the Bentley is the one who procured, like, not the props master, but the one who made sure we had the right stuff for all of the drama things. So like, we need a tree. It's like, I got it. Just tell me the kind of tree. I have a guy who can find it. And it wasn't like a fake prop. It wasn't a cardboard cutout. It was the tree.
You wanted a tree. You want a spruce, right? Well, here it is.
Amelia, how about you? What's the stereotype that people would know you as?
I really struggle with this. Like, high school was not a good time for me.
Yeah.
I think my character is very she's like artistic, but not like, she's not like art student artsy. It's just sort of like, she dabbles in lots of creative things and it's like clearly an outlet for something, but like, it's not like her whole personality. You know what I mean? Like, she's not, like drama club. You took all the AP art classes. Like, I only do black and white photography and I developed them in the bathtub at my home. It's just like, she's going to try like all the different kinds of things and is like,
was your
okay
persona an early hipster?
Yeah, probably. No, the opposite of that. Like she dabbles in sort of all of the art things and isn't necessarily particularly good at any of them, but likes doing it for fun.
Okay. I think
I'm going to name her Juliet.
Juliet.
Just because we're being in our drama club.
Yeah. I think Frances was a bit of a wallflower. I think the family name weighed upon them. And Frances would have been he, him in high school, probably goes he, they, or they, them in the present day. But at the time, he, him. 2003 was still a weird time. But yeah, a bit of a wallflower, didn't love speaking up, would have liked to. And that's where running the game like allowed him to tell people to shut up, tell people to listen to him, but would never have done that on like a day-to-day basis. Like never took lead character in the plays. He would always be like a second, like he would love like a big monologue, but only as a secondary character.
Yeah.
Call to action.
Yeah, like that. I'm really glad that we're getting to cover this game. It is super meta.
It's so meta.
It's so meta. I'm reading the comics now.
Okay.
Because I hadn't before, and they're very good.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I hesitate to be like, oh, I really want to play this game because I say that every time. I feel like we're at the point where it doesn't carry any weight anymore.
Like, yeah, sure.
You
okay,
know?
Amelia and Ryan.
Yeah, right. Like you can't rate everything 10 out of 10. But I really do.
It feels like this game is like ripe for everything that you want in an RPG.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like a lot of intra-party conflict and scheming and like heartbreak and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It feels like and I love how it can be so variable as well. To like from like pure devastation to like triumph in the face of adversity, you know, and anywhere in between.
Right.
It's so good.
And it just feels very different from other games that I've played.
Yeah.
You know, like it feels new.
Right, exactly. A game like this as a LARP would be wild.
Whoa.
Because then you're just next level meta everything.
Yeah.
You know?
That's you pretending to be somebody else. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's too much for me. That's too
you
much for
as
my brain.
Somebody else. Exactly.
It's too late in the day.
I know, it's fine. It's fine. But goodness, I can't wait until we get to the next episode where we learn about our personas and all that sort of stuff.
Ooh,
It is such a treat.
Chef's kiss. It's good.
But before we let you all go for the day, here are our calls to action.
As everyone knows, Twitter is having a moment and not in a good way. So we've been kind of on the lookout for a new social media platform to move to because we see the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
So currently it's looking to be like a combination of BlueSky, Discord, maybe TikTok. We're still on Twitter for now, so you can still keep up with us there while things are not completely burned to the ground yet. I think everybody's kind of waiting to see where people are going to land.
Yeah.
You know, like it was co-host, it was Mastodon, it was, you know, a Google Plus. So, but right now it looks like BlueSky is where we're going to be mostly. So if you have an invite there, you can find us under Creation Cast. I am Ginger Reckoning. Ryan is Lord Neptune. We might be changing like our user domains, that bluesky.social or whatever. But you know, for now, I am Ginger Reckoning everywhere.
Yeah.
So
you should recognize our social media profile pictures too. So
yeah. You can also find us on our Discord at discord.charactercreationcast.com. I'm also Ginger Reckoning on Discord.
I am Lord Neptune RB because Lord Neptune was taken.
Rude. You can also find us on TikTok. Are we at Creation Cast or at Character Creation Cast?
I think we're at Creation Cast. I'd have to double check on that.
Okay.
Oh, we're on there.
Yeah, we're on there. Maybe we'll do some more stuff there. Hoping to play around with it. Who knows? But we have similar usernames there as well, by which I mean I am still Ginger Reckoning on there. Are you just Lord Neptune?
I think I've got the RB on there too. It's very frustrating.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah, you can look around. We're there. You can also keep up with us through our monthly newsletter. You can sign up on our website or by going to newsletter.charactercreationcast.com, which is still technically also our website, but I don't know. You can do newsletter.charactercreationcast.com or you can do
Takes you right
charactercreationcast.com/newsletters.
It takes you right there either way.
One is one letter shorter, I guess.
Exactly.
I don't know.
We try to have convenience for people here.
Right.
But if you enjoy what we do here on the show, one way you can really help us out a great deal and get yourself a lot of really cool stuff in the process is heading to our Patreon at patreon.com/charactercreationcast. All of our patrons get access to special all patron Discord channels on our Discord. You get bonus chit chat episodes every week, as well as shout outs on the show. And at higher tiers, you can get things like bonus episodes, actual dice mailed to you, stickers, and a whole lot more.
If you want us to thank you personally in every episode, don't forget to join up. Then we can read your name out during our calls to action, like we're about to do right now for our recurring patrons. As usual, we are starting with Lieutenant and DJG, aka Tyrannosaurus. Thank you for making all of this possible.
We are glad to have you here, Eric Bonce and Daryl Holiday II. Thanks for supporting.
Shadim Cabal and the Shyest Barbarian, thank you so much.
Benjamin Sweeney and Lorcan McGinnis, we can't thank you enough, but we will keep on trying.
Thank you to Rob Fletcher and Kevin Brown. We are really glad to have you backing us.
Tentacle Duck and Cole McCallum, thanks for your continued support.
John Adamus and the Apocalyptic Acapella Aardvarks, we can't thank you enough, especially for that name. Thank you both for your support and for letting me read that name.
Absolutely. Carlos Salazar and Eric S., many thanks to you.
Thanks, Ross Kingston and Ian Popmeyer. We are glad to have you with us.
Grace Bergeron and Sorigoth, we are so grateful to you.
Liam G. and Brian Colm, thank you for believing in us.
Thanks, Garden GM and Dark Mirror. We're very glad to have you here with us.
Tom and Blue Kryptonite, our deepest thanks.
Thank you, Danny and Nicole Trainer. Your support brings us so much joy.
Liam Murray and Satwat Kangura, we appreciate your support. Thank you.
And thanks to all of our future supporters. You are helping to pay for everything we put into the show and contributing to a growing and really amazing community. If you want to help out in non-financial ways, you can talk about us on social media or join us on our Discord at discord.charactercreationcast.com and chat with us and so many others in the community.
You can also leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Podcast Addict, or even Facebook. We'll read all of the 5-star reviews out on the show and thank you personally. We still don't have any new reviews to read out for today's episode. So rude. But if you leave a review right now, we'll put you on the top of the list.
Exactly. That is all that we have for today's episode. Join us on our next episode where we finish our characters and find out what character class we all got. Until then, take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. Drink some water, spread some joy, and keep making those amazing people. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for part 1 of this character creation series. We'll be back in part 2, picking up right where we left off.
Character Creation Cast is a production of the One Shot Podcast Network and can be found online at www.charactercreationcast.com. Head to the website to get more information on our hosts, this show, and even our press kit. Character Creation Cast can also be found on Twitter and BlueSky at CreationCast, or on our Discord server at discord.charactercreationcast.com. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Bolter, and I can be found on Twitter and BlueSky at Lord Neptune or online at lordneptune.com. Our other host, Amelia Antrim, can be found on Twitter and BlueSky at Ginger Reckoning. Music for this episode is used with a Creative Commons license or with permission from the podcast they originated from. Further information can be found within the show notes. Our main theme music is Hero Remix by Steve Combs and is used with a Creative Commons license. This podcast is owned by us under Creative Commons. This episode was edited by Ryan Bolter. Further information for the game systems used and today's guests can also be found in the show notes. If you'd like to support our show, find us on Patreon. Get access to bonus episodes, exclusive merch, and much more at patreon.com/charactercreationcast. Thanks for joining us. And remember, we find that the best part of any role-playing game is character creation. So go out there and create some amazing people. We'll see you next time.